La Ventura is an interesting thing. It makes one think of when these highly acclaimed, now or eventually after their release, sometimes films were attempting to somewhat emulate the characteristics of the lauded experimental novels of the early 20th century. Both Antonioni's La Ventura and Fellini's La Dolce Vita of the same year resembles, in cinematic form, the molds of ambiguous, structurally adventurous narrative fictions from the few decades prior to the 60s. I believe this has to do with why so many cultural critics adore these films as the heights of the medium, because they were matching the magnitude, as they saw it, of the supposedly superior form, literature's most audacious achievements. I don't disagree with the adulation of these films, or novels, necessarily, whatsoever. Both of these titles represented, too, film narratives and compositional form itself, as the prospectively influential literature had, being pushed to their limits. Though cinema's techno-aesthetic shifted every decade, so the limits constantly expand, and they would beyond 1960, if one's frame of reference for human culture and existential pathos is the 1950s, then yes, La Ventura, if one was willing to step inside, was like witnessing the ends of existence itself, the malaise of uncertainty in a newly godless, ideological, materialist desert. This was the Cold War, remember. Spending was the true utopian way to counter the socialist dream turned nightmare. With this new sort of purchased utopia, this one that was quite literally sold to everyone. From a purely clinical assessment of cinematographic application, La Ventura is surely a dynamic masterpiece, and narratively it might be an interesting case of film transforming into an apparently experimental endeavour during the composition of it, as Blow Up apparently was some years later, or Lynch's Mulholland Drive decades later, rather than a preconceived master plan upending of narrative culture. At least one source claims Antonioni removed from the film, or just from the script, scenes of Anna's body being discovered, her fate ultimately revealed. This dichotomy alone illuminates the bold decision which Antonioni had made with this feature. Imagining the film with and without such a scene is lucidly instructive. Antonioni's best works have never remotely faltered from my initial or eventual awe toward them. In fact, that feeling may have increased compared with one's eventual placement of an artist like Fellini or even Bergman or Ozu or Truffaut, or possibly even Buñuel, within a certain time and a place, and the possibility that they could one day be considered marginally rote, over-elaborate, dated, or just contrived. Large dramatical satirical statements are resembling bulbous buildings, and such enormous statements are representative of excesses logistically only available in principle to a minute sum of individuals across this great globe. Or perhaps those who believe in a closed, perhaps God-inspired worldview wherein set values reign supreme and all must act to affirm those things. The contrived dramatic exercises, the ambitious satirical unravelings, the lengthy brooding articulations of pained existence via literature, or even the awe-inspiring epic film productions recording feats of human cooperation in unprecedented compositional form, kind of meta in its own way. Appreciating that when you're in the film, you're sort of appreciating the spectacle of what they've devised, what's happening in front of the camera, in sort of this fictional context, but also just the fact that they've accomplished it in the first place, I suppose. But that these forms, these things I've just mentioned, they are indicative of a worldview of more and less. Because for most of our existence, it sometimes seems, individuals have difficulty imagining happiness unless they live in a world where a sufficient sum of people are worse off than them. We move past the big statements. We experience them, they are grand, they are great, and then we move out back into the real world. We value instead the works which stay with us, whether they are portable or not, the film that screams true, constantly remembered in waking existence, or the novel or text one can carry with them at all times, finding tremendous use or solace in it, or the music which one plays to assure good tidings in travelling circumstances, the art which reconfigures our reality and engenders us to reassess it for our psychological, material, and social enrichment. Antonioni's best films appear to flow free, anticipating the cinematographic capacities of the now, less interested in the contrivances of great works, and more in the quasi-postmodern deconstruction of them, which simply makes more sense to those of us born more recently anyway. The old overarching grand narratives slip away. The chaos of nature is not conducive to taking elaborate constructions of structurally reminiscent great works as the most compelling distillations of human existences. Something does not seem organic about certain contrivances compositionally, a certain baroque quality to the great artworks of old. They seem too anthropogenic, elaborate, pompous architecture rather than more egalitarian, relatable, and universal dwellings. These are the thoughts which come to my mind when attempting to articulate why Antonioni's best films have me feeling more fulfilled than most European filmmakers, which isn't to say I don't revere the European auteurs of legend, I utterly do. But aside from Antonioni, the only other European legends I admire more might be Herzog or Fassbinder, or Silberberg or Kluger, maybe, or Oettinger, maybe some of the Polish guys. Goddard, maybe, with the vast body of work over decades. František Vlasel, maybe. Alain René, maybe. From Hungary, Miklos Jancho, whom Noel Oakeshott once claimed could have been Jean-Luc Godard if the world had let him. And the great animation genius, Marcel Jankovics. Not counting the UK, though even if I did, I'm not sure who would be on par with Antonioni. Greenway, maybe. Jarman, Rogood, Davies, maybe. I've chosen not to include Russia in the equation either, though if I had, there's plenty of individuals to choose from, be it the silent era geniuses, Tarkovsky and Sokurov later, even animation geniuses like Norstein. My 1001 movies you ought to see prior to carking it has this to say. At its premiere at the Cannes Film Festival in 1960, L'Avventura was jeered at and booed by a predominantly hostile audience, though a large number of influential critics and filmmakers took the unprecedented step of signing a statement rejecting this reaction and hailing it as the most important film ever shown at the festival. Within 2 years, L'Avventura was reckoned by the International Critics Poll conducted by Britain's Sight and Sound magazine as the second greatest movie ever made. Although writer-director Michelangelo Antonioni had been making documentaries and features for nearly 20 years, this epic-length film was his major artistic and commercial breakthrough, not least because it was his first proper collaboration with Monica Vitti, the actress who was the human and humane channel through which a listless, jaded, dehumanized society is viewed, and who would become the focus of his subsequent films La Notte, 1961, L'Éclisse, 1962, and Il Deserto Rosso, 1964. L'Avventura's premise is disarmingly simple, yet deeply unsettling. A small party of moneyed Roman characters take a cruise from Sicily and stop off at a desolate, rocky island to pass an idle afternoon that stretches into an ordeal when Anna Lee Massari disappears. The slightly vain, uncommitted girl has indicated to her more sensible friend Claudia Vitti that she knows something is not right between her and her architectural consultant lover Sandro, Gabriele Ferzetti, and has attracted attention by pretending to sight a shark while swimming. Watching the film for the second time, knowing that this major character will disappear after 26 minutes, we might notice that there really was a shark, and that for a small never-mentioned boat can be glimpsed passing the island a short fade after our last look at Anna. A major cause of initial audience befuddlement and fury of L'Avventura is that Antonioni never reveals what has happened to Anna. Claudia and Sandro are drawn together as they search, but none of the other characters ever seem that interested in the girl's fate, and the main emotional impact comes from Claudia's feelings of guilt as she gets together romantically with Sandro rather than her desire to find her friend. The plot, presumably by coincidence, rather parallels Hitchcock's Psycho, 1960, with the jarring absence of the character we assumed to be the heroine in the second part of the film, and an uneasy relationship growing between the missing woman's lover and a woman with an equal interest in her welfare. The subject matter also parallels the same year's La Dolce Vita. Nita Ekberg's starlet has an equivalent in L'Avventura's flighty star writer whore, Dorothy de Poliolo, who is mobbed by fans early on when she deliberately rips her tight skirt in public and pops up, not so much to wreck the central couple's new relationship as to reveal it as a sham, but there is none of the ambiguous glamour of Fellini's film here. Like Marcello Mastroianni's writer who slides into the role of PR man, Ferzetti's architect turned rich man's flunky epitomizes failed promise, and Antonioni can only find a trace of hope in an eternal feminine ideal who ultimately stands apart from the corruption of new money or too casual sex. It's worth mentioning, actually, some people tend to talk about Godard's Breathless, A Bout de Souffle, as, this crowning achievement of cinema in 1960 that pushed the envelope forward. I prefer we talk about those films as obviously L'Avventura and La Dolce Vita as well, and Psycho also mentioned in this passage here. And I think more importantly than Jean Seberg is, as far as these dynamic female leads go, we've got to talk about The Apartment and Shirley MacLaine. Also worth mentioning from 1960 are Suzuki's Take Aim at the Police Van, Cardiff's Sons and Lovers, Kurosawa's The Bad Sleep Well, and why not Kubrick's Spartacus.